In this video, we're going to talk about version control and why do we need it. Let's say a typical example is you work on a project in a team. It could be a startup or a big project at Google, for example, or some big company. So let's say 5 developers are working on the same code of the application. You build front end, Steve, another developer in your team, builds backend, then Emily does the database connection part, they add code, and so on. So how do you share the code among you and a team, especially when many of you work on the same files and make changes in the same file? How does this actually work? It works so that code is hosted centrally on internet, so you can all access it, and the place where code lives is called code repository. But you aren't editing the file in the real time in the remote repository, like in Google Docs, multi-collaboration, for example. Also, you need the code locally to start the application, develop stuff, and so on. So you fetch that code from a remote repository to your local machine, do some changes, and then push those changes back to the repository so the next developer can fetch it on their computer and make his or her changes. So all developers just push and pull changes in and from this code repository. What happens when you and Emily, for example, change the same files? Git knows how to merge most of the changes in the same files. So when you fetch the code that has the changes in the same files that you have changed locally, Git will help you merge those changes before you push yours to the repository. But what happens if you edit files for days and at the same time Emily changes the same files in completely different direction, right? So these changes will be so different that Git won't be able to sort this out, right? So that maybe the same exact locations in that file have been updated, so Git doesn't know, do you want your changes or changes of Emily, right? So these are called conflicts. And in this case, you will have to go to Emily and then manually try to sort how the end result should look like. So maybe communicate, what did you change here, how we can adjust the code so that both of our changes make sense. And that sounds tedious. Because of that, best practice in development, when working in a bigger team of developers that work on the same code, the best practice is to keep pushing and pulling often from the repository, so Git doesn't have to merge huge changes that overlap too much. And you can also easily sort those different changes out. This is called continuous integration. Basically integrating your code changes frequently in the repository. Now, what happens if someone messes code up and the changes break the application? So for example, you have a new junior developer and he accidentally checks in some changes to the repository that doesn't compile, so you cannot start the application. So nothing works and runs and everybody's blocked. First of all, when someone pushes their breaking changes to the repository, the breaking changes could be an official term for this, it doesn't affect you until you pull these changes from the remote repository, because you are working with your local copy of that repository. But once you pull those changes, you have the breaking changes too. But no need to panic. Version control keeps a history of the changes to the repository. So every code change in every file is tracked in Git. So every change commit by a dev member is a new history item. And the good thing is that you can revert the commits, or you can simply go back to the previous version of the repository anytime. That's where the name version control comes from. So as code develops, you don't have to worry about losing the track of what changes have happened to specific files. And also, each change is labeled with commit messages, so you also know why you or someone else made those changes for future reference, which naturally means that your commits shouldn't be too large so that it's easily reversible, first of all, and also can be easily described with a commit message.